Talk about pulling a complete 180. While Dino Crisis 1 tried to reinvent the Resident Evil formula, Dino Crisis 2 instead takes it in a drastically different direction. I'd say it's the right call, as the first game didn't quite seem to know what it was trying to achieve, and it might have been held back by the pedigree of its spiritual predecessor. For the sequel, on the other hand, it is far more focused on establishing an identity of its own, and I really like the direction it went with. It is still rough around the edges, but I respect it for making a solid attempt, and it's pretty fun. And that's the part that counts the most. For those who actually care about the story of the Dino Crisis series and don't want to hear spoilers, go ahead and skip to the 2-minute, 7-second mark. So, picking up after the first game, the mad scientist Dr. Kirk had managed to open a time-traveling portal millions of years into the past. And, of course, dinosaurs just sauntered on through and ate all the scientists. Regina completed her mission and brought back the data of the experiment and gave it to the government.
Once we deliver this disc to our government, our real mission will be complete.
They don't seem to say what country or organization, but okay. And this government immediately went back to work on perfecting the time-traveling technology. This led to an experiment gone wrong in which both the laboratory and an entire city got displaced in time. Regina is back from the first game, and she joins a military platoon to enter the time portal and rescue as many survivors as they can. The story of the first game was pretty bad, but this... well, they really doubled down on the time-traveling aspect, and in more ways than you can possibly imagine. There is now a gang of cyberpunk assassins who are hunting down the heroes. I don't think anything else needs to be said. You have to play this game and find out the plot twist for yourself. At least the characters take everything in stride this time. The first game tried to walk this line between comedic moments and being a little serious. The sequel, on the other hand, says, nah, forget it. We understand how ridiculous and downright awful the story is, so let's have some fun with it. In that regard, it's better than the story of the first game, but you have to go into it with a so bad it's good kind of mentality. While the original game had entirely 3D polygonal graphics, the sequel returns to the pre-rendered backgrounds that were a signature look of the Resident Evil series. Unfortunately, this also means that the camera is much more static, and the problem goes beyond merely aesthetics. I'll go more into that later. Anyway, it is a much better looking game overall. While pretty much the entirety of Dino Crisis 1 was a big, boring, gray facility, Dino Crisis 2 features a jungle, a city, an underwater laboratory, and a few little outposts here and there with a lot more use of vibrant colors. There's a lot more variety in the environments this time, and that's a big boost in comparison to the original game. That being said, I do wish there was a little more. The city in particular is a rather small segment, but the game as a whole does handle everything fairly well. The cutscene animations are great too. The stock poses and actions of the previous Resident Evil games have been upgraded with proper fluid animations. It's just a shame that it's being used in such a ridiculous story. As for the gameplay, it's about as out there as the plot, but it's also a lot more fun too. For starters, there's no walking in this game, you can only move at full sprint. This helps emphasize the faster pace that they're going for here. Automatically aiming up and down, as well as firing your gun while moving, make a return as well. And they actually have proper uses this time due to more verticality in the environment, and the game pressuring you to keep moving due to more aggressive enemies. Those little quality of life additions didn't mean much in the original, but the sequel has been changed to accommodate these features, and it did it pretty well. On top of that, there's some actual variety with the enemies this time. It's not a ton, but it is at least enough so that I won't complain about it too much. The pterodactyls are a real threat now, there's a couple of water-based enemies, and there's a boss fight in there that's pretty cool. The other boss fights aren't too big of a deal, but at least they tried, and it is enough to help keep the game interesting. Alongside the variety of enemies is a variety of weapons. You have your standard pistol, shotgun, and machine gun, but there's some pretty crazy weapons as well. The solid cannon fires a short-range ball of electricity, the firewall quite literally creates a wall of fire, and the chain mine fires a long-range series of explosions. Furthermore, 2 weapons can be equipped at once, with the secondary weapon designed around assisting with defensive maneuvers. It would have been cool to dual-wield any combination of weapons instead of categorized primary and secondary weapons, but for what it is, I like what they went for here. The story also has the players switching between Regina and Dylan every now and then, and each have their own exclusive weapons, which further helps with the variety, and each one also has their own unique key weapon. Dylan has a machete which allows him to cut through vines, and Regina's stun rod lets her short-circuit some pieces of machinery. Of course, these melee weapons are the worst ones in their inventory, so you're never going to use them, which makes it annoying to have to constantly go back to the menu to re-equip them whenever you want to open a certain door. It's not awful, but it is a bit of an annoyance. There's also an in-game currency called extinction points for each dinosaur killed. Maintaining a steady stream of kills leads to a combo, and avoiding damage awards a massive bonus. This is calculated each time you move between areas, and enemies often respawn so the player can farm for points if they're so inclined. I'm not a big fan of grinding for points, but I never felt like I was missing out on anything here either. You get plenty of money to shop for whatever you want, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of Resident Evil 4.
Welcome.
The game sounds pretty great so far, but there are some fatal flaws that bring down the whole thing really hard. The big one is the fixed camera perspective, making it impossible to tell what's up ahead. This is only occasionally an issue in the slower-paced Resident Evil games, but it's incredibly obnoxious in Dino Crisis 2. Raptors have no qualms about suddenly jumping you from the jungle or waiting for you mere inches off screen. To make matters worse, the respawning system is absurd. It seems like there can't be more than 3 enemies active at a time, and any killed dinosaurs are then immediately replaced upon a camera change. This means that it's not uncommon for enemies to constantly come after you 3 at a time. Even if there were no enemies in the area a second ago, one will inevitably teleport right behind you as soon as the camera changes. Trying to outrun them is ill-advised as well, which makes sense for raptors, but it's just aggravating how badly they're able to swarm you. And yet, none of this really matters. The player gets showered in healing supplies, and ammunition is both cheap and plentiful. And I mean really plentiful. You can just throw yourself at enemies and you'll get by just fine. There's even this area here which seems like it was made specifically to grind for points. Because, you know, that's what I love to do, mindlessly run laps and rack up points for a while. That's what makes a good game, right? Again, I never actually had to grind for points, so this isn't that big of a deal. But it's so strange that this was designed like this at all. And then there's the slap in the face that is Dino Crisis 2's hard mode. Enemies' offense and defense are doubled, the inventory limit and supplies obtained are cut in half, and even the shop prices are drastically increased. Now, I typically prefer harder difficulties, but it is absolutely ludicrous here. You die in 3 hits no matter what, and enemies are still rushing at you seemingly at random. If they all still died in 1 or 2 blasts from the shotgun, then maybe this would be reasonable. But these guys are built like tanks. You're using about 3 times the ammo, and since weapons are even more expensive this time around, you actually do have to grind for stuff. There is this awkward dodge command, maybe it helps. I mean, for all I know, this is the key to getting good at the game, but I don't feel like it really made a difference, and you definitely don't need to do it at all for the normal difficulty. Hard mode in this game just feels unfair and terrible, but thankfully the normal difficulty is okay. It's way too easy, but it is pretty fun. Unlike the first Dino Crisis, the sequel has a bonus minigame which is kinda cool, even if there's not much to it. You have the option of a simplified 2-player dinosaur fighting game, and there's an arena where wave after wave of dinosaurs come after you. There's a handful of characters to choose from, including Rick and Gale from Dino Crisis 1. However, there's only one arena and one set of enemies, which is a shame. The longevity doesn't last very long, even if there is a ranking system. There could have been something pretty cool here, but there's not much to it. Once again for Dino Crisis, this game is really weird, but this time it's not half bad. I wouldn't say that it necessarily works particularly well, and there wasn't an attempt whatsoever at balancing the game. Normal mode is a cakewalk and hard mode is a nightmare, but everything does manage to come together well enough. There are actually some cool set pieces, and the game as a whole is pretty fun. I do miss the item mixing from the first game, but everything else here is a massive improvement. And I definitely don't miss the overabundance of puzzles. I wouldn't say that you're really missing much if you decide to skip this game, but if you're a huge Resident Evil fan, then I think this one's pretty cool to check out. Forget about the first game and just play this one. Thanks for watching my review on Dino Crisis 2.